Hi, guys, and welcome to Veteran State of Mind. Yes, I said Veteran State of Mind. We haven't done one of these for a while. I didn't even know if I was going to do them again, to be honest. The idea was, and still is, to make the War Story podcast a priority. The reason being because, I want to get as many of your operational experiences down, recorded before we forget them, basically. And they are lost to history. So that has been the main effort and will continue to be the main effort going forwards. But I really miss having the Veteran State of Mind conversations where we talk about what's come after the military for people. And I know a lot of people have missed those too. So we're back with Veteran State of Mind. I think the plan will be going forward that we'll do one Veteran State of Mind a month and a couple of war stories. And then if things open up where we can get more in, then we will. But that'll kind of be the plan going forward from now, from now until change my mind again. As I want to do. But the other one as well is I do have some of you I know asking when Ransom Banter is going to be back. Never say never, but probably never. Reason being because I know I've said it before, but I'll just say it again as well, so everyone's kind of clear on the same page. Is that, believe it or not, Joe and I did actually used to put a bit of work in learning about what we were speaking, which I don't know if I was proper English, but the point being that we didn't just want to come on and gob off. We actually wanted to come in with our facts straight and everything like that. And I think, to be fair, if you go back and look at what we talked about, I think we're batting a pretty strong percentage and hit rate on what we discussed and what we foresaw. But yeah, it's time away from doing other things, guys. Joe's got his own things going on. And speaking for myself, I feel a lot better in myself when I'm working on projects that focus more towards remembrance than I do talking about dickheads that we have in government. So that's kind of been what the focus is. And so if it comes up on Veteran State of Mind that those topics come up, great. But they're not going to be things that we set up episodes for specifically. All right, this intro's gone on way longer than I wanted it to. As I said, Veteran State of Mind is back because we want to talk to interesting guests about the stories after the military. Here is one of those guests. His name is Daril Fannin. I've got his biography in front of me. I'm not going to read it because, one, I can't read very well and out loud, and two, because Daril's going to tell us the story himself. He was a great guest. Really enjoyed the conversation. So, without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Daril Fannin. Daril, welcome to the podcast, mate. Great to have you. How are you doing? How's everything? Are you in sunny Los Angeles right now?
Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles right now. I am doing fucking amazing, dude. This has been the craziest week. We just had an incredible deal come through for a movie that I produced. So I'm living like as great as someone can in this moment.
I can confirm to the audio listeners that the smile is white and broad and very well deserved. So well done on that, mate. We're going to talk a bit about movies and all that side of things later, but we are Veteran State of Mind. So let's get to the veteran-y stuff first. Let's take it way back, mate. Let's take it back to childhood. Where did you grow up? And was there anything about your childhood that might stand out to our listeners?
What a wonderful question to open up with, dude. I was actually born in the Southeast United States, so raised in a little town called Skinham, Tennessee. There were like 900 people in that town, and I was actually born in a fundamentalist religious cult. So I grew up in an environment that was very different than most people. We were not allowed to wear shorts or play sports or go to the movies. We called the TV the television. We looked kind of Amish. Women couldn't cut their hair or wear makeup or jewelry or pants. It was just a very, very weird sect of Pentecostal Christianity. So I don't know if you're familiar with like the tongue speaking, hellfire and brimstone. We didn't personally drink poison or handle snakes, but we were in that realm of just extremist religious fanatics. And my dad was actually a pastor. So I grew up in the side of a church in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee, hunting for my own food at 11 years old, with rabbit, squirrel, deer, turkey, all that kind of stuff. It was a very different than I think most people in 20, well, I guess it wasn't the 20s then, 1980s then. I'm dating myself, but yeah.
So how did how did your family get into that kind of cult? And also, can you explain to, I think British listeners were not maybe as familiar with the term pastor, so can you just explain a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so my dad was actually a minister. My mom and my dad both worked for the church, and they made like almost no money. So we lived on about $600 a month, and we lived in the side of the church. So my parents' bedroom, living room, kitchen, and dining room was all in one little room. My brother and I split about half of a Sunday school room as a bedroom, and that was our entire lives were devoted to helping convert people into our crazy denomination. So my dad, 7 days a week, he was very much discouraged from doing any kind of other work. And his whole purpose was to recruit people and bring them into to this church. And everybody had to give 10%, their tithe on top of that. And what's really interesting is that my parents both got in about the same time. They were both in their late teens, early 20s. There was some like tumultuous family stuff where they were both kind of looking for, I think, love and acceptance and some kind of stability in the world. And my mom is very much brilliant. She was, at the time, she was going to the university. So she was going to Georgia Tech. She was taking like Calculus 6. And she left all of that behind to follow God and start a family. And my dad, his mom and dad had kind of, I don't want to say they straight up abandoned him, but they basically moved without telling him.
Sorry, mate, we missed that bit. Can you just go? I'll just make a little note here. Unfortunately, with the internet here, every now and again it'll drop out, so I'll just make a little note at the time. Can you just go from your mum abandoning that bit there?
Yes. Yeah, so my mom was in university. She was going to Georgia Tech, and she was taking like up to Calculus 6, so she's very much math oriented. And she basically left all of that to follow God and start a family. And my dad, he had been somewhat abandoned by his family. They had moved states without telling him. He's a teenager in the Boy Scouts. I don't know if you're familiar with the Boy Scouts of America. Basically, he went away on a trip and came back home, and his family was gone. And so they both found a group of people. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. But they both found a group of people that loved them and gave them a lot of care and attention and community, which I think is actually, when I think about the one thing that I kind of miss from that cultish experience, it was the community. And that's the brotherhood that I found in the military that replaced it. We'll get into all of that. Mm-hmm. But it was really interesting to watch because I think both of my parents had kind of this hole in their heart that they were seeking to fill. And they found a world which made everything very simple. There were black and white rules, everything was very clear. You followed a certain guideline. And then when you followed that guideline, you got unconditional love and acceptance. And feeding the ego a little bit, you got to feel superior to everyone around you because you knew what was right and you had capital T truth. And so when I was born into this, my dad was a minister working for the church. My mom was giving all of her time and they were making just a few $100, like $100 a week at the early parts of our life. And then we got up to about $600 a month when my dad was working inside the church. But we were very much impoverished. We were living below the poverty line. But what I was surrounded with constantly was what I think I felt like was the idyllic childhood. There's the Leave It to Beaver, which was a TV show way back in the day, black and white, but it was like this idyllic family. And I had this idea of the environment and life that I grew up in. And I thought I lived in this perfect, homogenous, amazing society in which there was nothing but love and support. And then deep down, I realized actually it's a very toxic, controlling environment where they wanted to egoically manipulate you. And we can get into some of the details, but one of my most favorite memories, and I say that now with like a little bit of levity, but this something that haunted me for a very long time is in this cult specifically, we had a doctrine that said that if you did not speak in a language you had never heard before, you would be tortured for eternity by God. So if you didn't speak in tongues and speak in a language that was either of angels or of men that God impressed upon you, then for all of eternity, God was going to torture you. And the pastor would get up, and this was very much a hellfire and brimstone type sermon, and he would describe what it was like being tortured in eternal hellfire and how your blood would boil out of your skin. And at 5 years old, that was fucking terrifying. And so I remember going down to the very front and raising my hands and praying, saying, God, forgive me. Let me speak in tongues. Let me speak with your language so that I can be saved, and feeling like ultimately not good enough because there was some part of me that God, that I had forgotten to repent because I was at the age of accountability where I knew the difference between right and wrong. And yet still I couldn't speak in this crazy language. And I remember being so emotionally upset that I began to flub my words. And then someone was like, that's it. And they began to quote the prophet Isaiah, with stammering lips in another tongue will I speak into my people. And then that was the kind of crazed moment because I knew what my heart was trying to say. And I knew that it didn't matter what came out of my mouth. And then I entered into this kind of wild state where I began to speak in tongues, saying all kinds of gibberish. And in my heart, I was just saying, God, I love you. Forgive me. Please don't torture me. And that was a part of, well, just one of the many, many, many crazy things that we believe.
So I can see how people are drawn to this. Any Marines listening would, confess that they belong to a cult. I think a lot of us joining the military are looking for belonging, a set of code and all that stuff. What is a bit more difficult to understand is how a child who's raised in a certain environment can come to think outside of it, especially without such things as television and radios and things like that, which I'm assuming is part of the control in itself. It's like we don't want to get any fucking ideas.
Exactly.
We're recording from the UK right now. We're kind of going through this now where they're trying to stop people sharing ideas and things. So, what is it then? What was it within you that was questioning this kind of order?
I think there were a few things. One, I was also homeschooled, right? So I didn't even go to a regular school. So everything that I got was in this world. But my mom really emphasized logic to us, which is kind of ironic. But she's very math oriented. And so she very much instilled the basics. And it's actually something that I don't know how it is in the UK, but it's definitely in the United States. Critical thinking is not something that is taught, which is mind-boggling to me. Like, of the most basic shit that you should learn in your education, it should be how to think. And I'm very grateful that my mom instilled a lot of those principles within me. Also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but it's like this personality type test. And I am an 8 or a challenger. There's something in my nature that wants to buck against the system, especially when there is a bit of injustice. I'm also a little bit neurodivergent, and so my justice meters are very strong. So when I see some type of injustice, it bothers me deeply, and I am driven to action. And so I think, at 17 years old, I was the youngest licensed minister in this organization. So I was traveling around the United States, speaking in tongues and being called a prophet. One time I picked someone up out of a wheelchair and they walked, and I didn't know about the placebo effect. So I thought, fuck it, I've got the power of God, and it took me many years of rationalization to try and unwind. But again, this was my entire world. And I had always been exposed to these ideas, but then there were certain things that bothered me, like facial hair. They told me that having a beard was a sin. And I'm going, every picture of Jesus, he's got a beard. What gives? This doesn't make sense. They told us that it was a sin for a woman to cut her hair or for a woman to wear jewelry. And I'm like, the bride of Christ in the Bible is adorned in jewelry. So those kind of things created some cognitive dissonance. And then at some point, about 17 years old, I think the full rebellious nature of my teenager kicked in. And I thought, you know what? The Bible is full of incest, genocide, all kinds of graphic, terrible shit. That's basically what movies are. I want to go watch some movies. And so I went to my buddy, Andrew C., who I knew he was going to hell because he listened to Linkin Park. And I was like, hey, dude, I want to watch some movies. What should we go see? And so he suggested that we sneak out to Blockbuster and rent this movie called The Matrix, which, if you've seen The Matrix, broke my fucking mind, because this is a story about Neo, who is living in this false reality, completely constrained by his own limiting beliefs. And at that moment, I saw the metaphor of my life, and it became so clear to me why they didn't want us to watch the television, because it was an opening of a different type of worldview. I got new ideas, thoughts, opinions, points of view. And I look at that moment as like my coming out moment, where I was just like, this is it. I am someone that is truly different, and my life forever changed.
Yeah, I mean, what movie to pick?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, if it'd been Anchorman or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't mess with the Zohan, you know?
So how was it? You mentioned your friend, shout out Linkin Park as well, great band.
Yeah, exactly.
And how was it? You had friends who were kind of not within the church. Where did you meet people who were from like outside of the quote unquote?
Yeah. Great question. So we were very much in the world, but not of the world. So our whole goal was to blend into society and then recruit people in. And we would do that through all kinds of different ways. Like we would go knocking on doors, just like Jehovah's Witness style. If Mormons on missionary or on mission, we would pray for people that we found that were sick. We would just constantly try and do good in the world. I think I'm so impressed. I'm very impressed with my parents because of this, because they were in an absolutely restricted world that was full of crazy bullshit and toxicity, and they were still able to do a lot of good. We had individuals that they instilled in us the idea of like giving back. If we were living on $600 a month, there were people that were more poor than us, and we would help them with the money that we had. We would put gas in people's tanks. We would help them. I would go hunting, and we would grow food, and we would give that food away. And so it was really impressive that they were able to do a lot of good within this environment. But Andrew C. was actually another pastor's kid, so another preacher's kid. And he was one of those guys who was on the fringe, who kind of saw the corrupt theology for what it was. And so he was always rebelling. And his father, we lived and grew up in a world of spare the rod, spoil the child, meaning that, they would literally beat the shit out of him. His dad, like I have very vivid memories of him just getting the shit beat out of him with the stick. And they tried to steer the feel of God in them. And he was always just like, nah, this isn't love. This isn't healthy. This isn't right. And Andrew had a lot of his own issues and was, he's pretty fucked up too. But because he was in my life and I knew that he was like on the periphery, I knew that he saw things a little bit differently than me. And that bothered me because I felt like I was right. And then once my ego began to melt away, I began to realize how stupid I was and how correct he had been. And the fact that he knew to introduce me to The Matrix first, like of all the films, I think just shows how intentional he was and how powerful he knew storytelling could be, because he found the perfect story. He knew the metaphor, and he thought, hey, maybe this is a way to reach Daril that like all of our hours of arguing never could. And he was right. It did. It fundamentally changed me.
So you mentioned kind of like personality types and stuff. Do you think that this, because, you said your mum introduced you to critical thinking and stuff, but do you think that's almost like an inherent trait in some people as well? That kind of need to question everything, the need to have like one-on-one make two.
Yeah. I very much struggle with the whole nature versus nurture thing, especially given my background, right? Yeah. I think this is a fundamental question. I think that there is some truth to the inherent makeup of your parents, your DNA that I think predisposes you even subconsciously to a certain level. However, in my experience, which is very limited, I believe that it is our life experiences almost more than anything else that will shape and determine us. And I think, depending on what happens at a very young age, sometimes we can find ourselves in these neurological loops and patterns. So while I very much appreciate these personality tests, and I do think that there is something to that, I think that it is more probably our varied life experience than almost anything else. And I think about those studies that are done with twins as a great example of that. Like, very very interesting how different points of view and roles in society and experiences can cause us to go in completely different directions and have completely different underlying subconscious motivations. Yeah. What do you think? Are you of the mind of nature?
I think it's both, but I also think a big part of it is your kind of tolerance for fear and uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
Because again, Matrix nailed it. You get whatever color pill you want. I forget it personally.
Yeah.
Give me a more.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've heard quite a few people say that that they wish in a lot of ways that they hadn't had their eyes opened because the world makes a lot more sense. And it's scary when you realize that your own government isn't your friend, or when you realize that the military isn't your friend, or when you realize that the cult that you're in isn't your friend. I can understand why people kind of, it's kind of like that thing when you're in bed, you think there's a monster in there, so you go, fuck it, I'm gonna pull the blanket of safety over me. I can understand why some people looking at the real world go, nope, just pull that fucking thing back over, because they would just rather live with their head in the sand. And I think in today's age, it is a choice. Like before, I think, you could pull the wool over out people's eyes a lot easier. Now I think people really have to make a choice to dig in and go, I don't want to know. And a lot of people do. And I don't agree with it, but I can certainly understand why people could do that.
Yeah, I think Cypher, so the character in the Matrix who wants to get plugged back in, is one of the most sympathetic. At the time that I watched the movie, I was like, how could anyone have that point of view? And then after leaving my nice, quiet little environment where I had black and white rules, and I realized how complex the world is and how overwhelming it was, I immediately had that inclination of, I wish I could go back to the simplicity of knowing that I was right. And I think if I can just give a quick shout out to my family, my little brother, my mom and dad, they were not the type of people to bury their heads in the sand. They actually got out of the cult with me, which is something that almost never happens. And my parents at their 50s reinvented themselves entirely and had to start over because, again, they had spent the last 30 years. And my mom, again, thinking about her analytical brain, she said, I've spent the last 30 years trying to prove myself correct. I'm going to give myself a week and try and prove myself wrong. And within a week, she had basically deconstructed so much of that. And I was like, this woman is amazing. And then my dad, completely reinvented himself because his entire life was in ministry. He went and got a job making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, as an assistant baker at a coffee shop, more money than we had ever made in our lives. And he like truly, their entrepreneurial spirit, man, it was so amazing because I watched them. They learned how to run a shop and manage and bake and do all these things. And then they ended up buying out this shop that was completely failing, and they turned it into a profitable business, and they ended up selling it. And they've since moved to South Alabama to take care of my grandparents. But it's so cool to me to see someone who's willing to, at the age of 50, hit the reset button and just go, I'm going to step into the unknown. And I felt like that was a type of courage that I didn't have, because I at 17 years old enlisted in the military to escape that. That was my red pill moment. I was like, okay, I'm going to enlist as a combat medic. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to learn. I'm going to be given. And again, the camaraderie was so amazing to me. I needed that left and right limit and those, a structure in which I could figure out life. And I think the military provided that. And my parents didn't have any of that. They were still living in that same shitty little town with the same people and having to reinvent themselves kind of in an environment that had already labeled them as something very specific.
And what was the cult when you were growing up? What was their attitude, the one that they kind of imposed upon you about nation, patriotism, and military service?
Great question. So what was really interesting is that it was a hard split. Half were conscientious objectors, very much like my parents. Violence is evil. We shouldn't be doing good. Jesus didn't care about those things. And then the other half were very much of the I would call them the MAGA Christian group that exists today, which is very much like Christ, nation, state. We should be imposing our religion upon others. The things that I think Christ never would have said. Ironically, but it was a very much a divided camp within that. And what was interesting is, this cult had this thing called the umbrella doctrine. And basically the umbrella doctrine said, if you are serving underneath a pastor or a preacher or a presbyter of a certain area, then whatever they said was like the authority of God's protection over you, like an umbrella. And first of all, that's insane. There were no umbrellas in the Bible. Should have been a red flag. But it very much depended on what church, who was the pastor and who was the presbyter of the state that you were under. They got to make their own rules. It was almost like their own little kingdom. So it became this very corrupt hierarchical thing. And so you would have vastly different opinions from church to church, which became like wildly segmented and very much, I think, like the United States, where every state has their own kind of set of rules, and it's okay to smoke weed over here, but if you do it over here, you're going to go to jail for 20 years, this kind of very broken system. But my parents were both conscientious objectors, and one of the things that I find wildly mind-boggling is that I was able to convince them to sign for me to enlist at 17 before I was even a legal adult. And I think that was twofold. One, they had a lot of trust in me. And two, I told them that I felt like this was God's calling for my life, which is a very difficult argument to kind of bump up against. And so as a medic, I wanted to do good. I think I was very much inspired by that very first scene in Saving Private Ryan, where the medic is working on that dude, putting him together, and then he still gets shot anyway. Saving Private Ryan was one of the first movies. So after we watched The Matrix, we watched a bunch of movies that week, like literally 3 to 4 movies a night. We'd sneak out to Blockbuster, watch them on the laptop with a single earbud in, and that movie stood out to me. We Were Soldiers. I read this, great book by Michael J. Novosel about medevacs in Vietnam. And I just was so compelled to try and help people because I felt like that was a core of who I was. I wanted to help people. That's what I loved about being a minister. It's what I loved about what my family did within this organization. And so that's what I wanted to carry with me into my military service.
So you made the decision to join the military. In practical kind of terms, what did that look like? The recruiting process, like with you being homeschooled, did that cause any kinds of difficulties?
Yeah, great question. It caused a lot of problems. I didn't want to join the Army. I wanted to be a pararescueman, a PJ. And so I went to Anchorage to interview with the team up there. I had taken the PAST, which is the absurd physical test that you have to go through. And then I got to the final part where I was like, okay, I'm going to go to a recruiter again, because I was homeschooled. I was taking this initiative all by my own without really talking to anybody. I was on these online forums. I was learning all this myself. And then I went to the recruiter, and the Air Force recruiter was like, we will not take you. You're homeschooled. This isn't a real thing. You've got to go to college and get a 2-year degree if you want to be accepted. And the U.S. Army did. And so I found myself actually the Army National Guard, which was the best pitch in the world. This recruiter came to me and said, hey, you can work 1 weekend a month. You can go to college to get your degree at the same time, and we'll let you come in the National Guard. And so it was amazing because I ended up getting a job for the AGR, Active Guard and Reserve, where I was literally active duty, but working for the National Guard in a very small town. And so the process, though, of getting in was crazy because I went in and I was like, I was very much going to be a PJ. I want to do this is, for those of you who don't know, this is like the Air Force Special Forces, pararescuemen, jump behind enemy lines to rescue down pilots, those sorts of things. It's really cool. What they go through is like a Superman school. So it's very much all of the schools that you see in Green Beret, Airborne, Pathfinder. They do a lot of the same training, but they're also just like super medics. And so since I couldn't be a Superman, I decided I was going to go into the National Guard as a medic and use that time to get my education. And so that's what I did. I enlisted at 17. and then found myself at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I had no idea what I was getting into, to be honest. I don't think my frontal lobe was fully developed, so I had no real concept of the commitment that I was making. But I knew that it was a place where I could be given a rule book, which is kind of what I needed from my childhood. I needed a rule book that I could follow. And I found early on, I found that very powerful because I got to create a career within these left and right limits and excel as quickly as possible. And I knew exactly what the steps were. But then I found even those rules becoming quite limiting and frustrating over time. When I realized like, oh, I've maxed out my promotion points as an E5 3 years in, I went from an E1 to an E5 and I can't get promoted now.
Just explain that, mate. Just explain E1 to E5 for the Brits.
Oh, yeah. So I was a sergeant. So the ranking in the U.S. Army, I started off as a private E1, then private E2, PFC, private first class, specialist, and then sergeant. And so sergeant is our first level of non-commissioned officer. Technically, if you're a corporal, you're also a non-commissioned officer. That's an E4, but there are very few of them. And so I went from E1 to E5 within 3 years, which is about as fast as you can get promoted. Partially because I was able to do the Soldier of the Year competition. So the Army does this thing every year where they pit all of the soldiers against each other. It starts off with basic things like your physical fitness. So push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run. You have a formal board where you show up in your dress greens at the time. They're dress blues now. But dress greens, and they ask you a bunch of questions about Army regulations and all of that. And so went through that process. And what I remember is in basic training, I had a drill sergeant that was like, if you want to get promoted, do the Soldier of the Year thing. And that stuck with me. I was like, great. As soon as I got to my unit, the very first question that I asked is, hey, what does it take to do the Soldier of the Year competition? And they told me, you actually missed it. We're already doing it. It's next drill. And everybody else has been preparing for months. And I said, I don't need to prepare. Just let me do it. And so the very next month I showed up and I did very well. And it was crazy because it became this kind of thing where I showed up at my unit. They had just gotten back from Iraq. And so I showed up at this unit and immediately was thrown into the Soldier of the Year competition. And so in 2008, I actually won the Soldier of the Year for the state of Tennessee and then Region 3, the Southeast United States. And what was amazing is that gave me the opportunity to go to a bunch of schools. So for almost a year, as a medic, I was going to train with snipers. I was going to combative school, hand-to-hand combatives. I was driving tanks. I was learning how to do all kinds of things that were outside of my military occupational specialty, my medic role. And it gave me this really great broad experience. But it also meant that I wasn't really deployable during that time because I was going to all of these schools and education. And so what I felt was after my first 3 years, 2005, where I enlisted, to 2008, when I got Soldier of the Year, I was watching my friends deploy, and it started to fuck me up because I'm going like, oh man, I feel like I'm sitting on the bench here and I'm leaving my guys and I'm watching them, go to Iraq again for a second time. And I kind of missed both of those windows, which really started to bother me. But on the other hand, I was getting this incredible education. I had gotten a 2-year degree during that time. I was learning, every weapon system in the military and all kinds of skills that I really cemented in me the identity of a soldier, right? Because I lost my identity as a preacher in a cult. And then I immediately assumed a new role, which was a soldier in the U.S. military. And it was something that gave me a lot of sense of purpose and duty and infrastructure that I really loved and appreciated.
So the Soldier of the Year then, are you graded at your location with your unit and then they send them all in and say, oh, you go off to do this in a central location?
Yeah, exactly. So we start off imagine your platoon level. So there's 150 dudes and I was the best out of that. And then it goes from it went from the platoon, from up to our squadron, and then from the squadron to the regiment, and then from the regiment across the entire state, and then across the entire state to the Southeast United States. And then it was the global competition. And so, and this happens every year. I feel like someone should document this because it's such a cool experience. And I actually think it would be the ultimate competition show, because you learn and you train alongside these incredible people. And what was really impressive to me is like, you know, there were no weight classes. So you would be fighting people that are like 200 pounds. And I was 170 pounds soaking wet. You know, I was just getting my ass handed to me. But I think that the tenacity that it built within me is second to none. And what I really realized in that process is that I wanted it more than anyone else. I wanted that title because I knew what that title meant for me was, one, it was a sense of like I actually belonged. So I had done what I needed to do. Two, it was a badge of pride. And three, it was a way for me to ensure that my career in the U.S. military was set, because I knew I was going to be a lifer. I wanted to do 20 years at least, maybe 30 years, and then retire. I really wanted that experience. And so my goal was to get promoted as quickly as possible and get on the radar. And that was very successful for me. I was literally, I found myself in 2008 in the Pentagon, sitting across from the Sergeant Major of the Army, Kenneth O. Preston. And I was in his office, and he like knife handed me, and he was like, Fannin, you need to go to college and get a degree. You've maxed out your promotion points. This is the last opportunity. And then they handed me a packet to go to Pathfinder, Pre-Ranger, Ranger, and Airborne, and then come back as an instructor. And so that was the career that I thought I was on. I was like, this is great. I'm going to go get my education. I'm going to come back. I'm going to fill out this packet, and then I'm going to go be a Green Beret, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an 18 Delta. And then I ended up getting a degree in screenwriting because I realized the Army didn't care what my degree was in. And I have this like artistic expression that I think is very interesting. And then suddenly that like hijacked my military career almost entirely, because I became so obsessed with telling stories. And I love that format. Movies literally changed my life. And so then I just fell into this art that was like almost, it wasn't completely separate from my military identity, but it was just such a different direction.
Okay, I want to dig into the screenwriting thing in a moment, but I should have asked you this earlier. With you enlisting in 2005, where were you on? Not necessarily geographically, but like what part of your life were you in during 9/11, and what, if any, impact did that have on the big picture of your life? Well, outside of obviously what it did for with the sense of the military.
Yeah, this is a great question, actually. So my family, we lived in the side of the church. We had upgraded our lives significantly. We had finally scraped enough money together to buy a double wide. So we were living in a trailer, high class. And I remember my mom came across from our neighbor, because we didn't have a TV, obviously. And they were like, hey, we need to go next door. And they've got the news on, and we need to watch something. And that stood out to me as like, what are we talking about? You're interrupting my homeschooling to tell me we need to go look at the television? Like, what's happening? I remember walking in, and I remember watching the very first image that kind of flashed up as a replay, as the announcers were just stunned, and I saw a plane fly into the first building. And I thought, this is absolutely the most terrible thing ever. I had never been to New York. Again, I grew up in a town of 900 people, so I couldn't fathom the scale of the Twin Towers. But I just remember thinking, like, oh my God, hundreds of people are going to lose their lives. And then when that second plane flew into the towers, I remember thinking, like, is this real? Like I was going through the denial phase. Like immediately I was like, this can't be possible. What I'm seeing is fake. This is obviously pre-AI, but I was just trying to like rationalize in my head how this could be happening. And it had such a giant impact on me that I, again, didn't have film and TV, but I began to read the newspapers, and I would cut out articles of the military movements and maps. And like, it was really weird now that I'm saying this out loud. This is the first time I think I've ever said this out loud, but I started creating a notebook, like a history binder, kind of like I did for World War II. And I loved studying like the tactical strategies of trench warfare in World War I and how that evolved. And so I began to look at this new type of warfare, because I knew this wasn't going to be the same. And of course, like, it's very obvious now, you'd say like, this unconventional warfare, it's like obviously the next phase. But at the time, from a teenage boy, I just remember going like, oh shit, this changes everything. We're not wearing uniforms. How are we going to determine who the enemy are? How and I was thinking from the practical standpoint of like, how do we not hurt civilians through this process? And I don't think that was like very much of a conversation. And I realized, especially when I got into the military, that I think I had demonized a lot of very innocent people because I told myself that they were like us in a cult, that everyone believed the same thing. And I had not yet been introduced to the idea of propaganda. I didn't really understand the world. And so I began to label entire people groups with these horrible things. And it took several years of being in the service for me to stop and go like, oh, wait a minute, this is a really toxic thought. But what was crazy is that thought was very much championed by, I think, a lot of the members of the military that I serve with, especially senior leadership. I found myself oddly becoming the outlier when I was, not for just nuking an entire people group, which seems crazy and terrifying to say.
That critical thinking will get you in trouble in the military, mate. Don't want any of that.
Yeah. You just shut up and do what you're told. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is the piece that ended up really, like, that voice found itself in my art. So I found myself expressing a lot of these opinions through screenwriting because it didn't have a place in my military life. I was constantly causing problems in the Tennessee National Guard. I had a major who was a racist piece of shit. Dude, he tried to pull Obama's photos off the wall, and he used the N-word prolifically, saying he didn't want any persons of color working in his armory. And I was constantly just rehanging the photos of Obama and reporting him and like causing all kinds of problems. And they definitely didn't help my career, But again, that justice within me, I was just like, this isn't right. You can't be affiliated with the KKK and be a leader in the U.S. military. That should not.
And he was affiliated with the KKK.
He was. He said that he wasn't a member, but he had lots of close friends who were. Right. And he said he wasn't a member. I'm very convinced somewhere in his closet there was a white hood. And I should say, the Klan was very present where I grew up in Tennessee. So it was founded in the town that was like right beside where I was born. So this was like a level of racism that, again, most people can't even begin to fathom, where people would make lynching references still and all kinds of terrible shit. And what was crazy to me is that it was very heavily influenced within our police culture and the military culture within Tennessee. And that's something that I was constantly very loudly pushing back against. And again, did not make a lot of friends as a result.
Okay, so let's talk about the course then. Let's talk about that. And you going into this course, seems pretty clear why you chose screenwriting, given what a monumental event it was. But it sounds like it was even more than you bargained for when you got onto this course and started working. So how did just talk us through the course and how that kind of changed you and your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took some writing classes when I was going through my undergrad, or I got 3 degrees from the military. So the first was from a local community college. It was a 2-year degree. And I took some writing courses, and there was this weird guy, Dr. Hartman, who showed up dressed like Evel Knievel day one. And I was like, this dude is fucking nuts. And he called himself Uncle Nutsy. And his whole thing
Uncle Nutsy?
Uncle Nutsy. Yeah, you heard me right. And his whole thing was like, I want to make education fun. And he was like, in his British literature class, he was like, look, I feel like I'm pimping out the old whores from the 16th to 18th century here. We got to throw a little makeup and razzle dazzle on them to make them fun. And so he would always come in. He would wear a different hat every day. He would tell this incredible story every day. And he challenged us to just think differently and express creatively in crazy ways. And so I really just fell in love with writing because of him. And then when I was going to get my degree from Southern New Hampshire University because they had a hybrid program that allowed me to do a lot of stuff online. I started taking these classes. And so I would be sitting in the back of a Bradley vehicle, just sweating it out in Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And then I'd be using my laptop. I type out, or I had a notebook in my cargo pocket everywhere I went. And I was just constantly writing. And eventually what became clear was that I loved telling stories way more than I loved being in the back of a Bradley sweating it out. Nothing wrong with kicking down doors and all that stuff. Like the training that I went through was great, and I did a lot of really amazing things in the back part of that. So in the back half of my degree, I kind of transitioned into this role as a medical readiness NCO, where I was helping soldiers who came back from war get the help that they needed, and I found that very fulfilling. However, I was also very quickly disillusioned because I saw that a lot of our government's talk about how they want to support the troops was in word only and not in deed. We were, this is the peak of the opioid crisis. We got people addicted, and then we were chaptering them out of the Army and labeling them as drug addicts and these terrible things as if it was their fault that they got blown up in a foreign country. And then we came back and we didn't give them the support that they needed medically. We got them addicted to all these drugs. And so as I was beginning to deal with all this frustration on the kind of side of the military, where I was like this, I'm becoming disillusioned, and the things that I thought we were fighting for were not actually fighting for. And then at the same time, I found a deep, deep love of storytelling. And I think part of the reason that I loved it is because I got to live someone else's experience. In order to write a great scene, I had to live the point of view from the main character, all of the ancillary characters, the evil enemy. And I had to humanize all these people and realize that this was all just a part of their own human experience. And that became almost addicting, dude. Like I fell in love with just like sharing these complex moral stories. And it started out in the very beginning as very clear, black and white, right and wrong, the propaganda type, stories from my childhood. But what I began to see is that things are far more interesting when you realize that maybe we're not evil. We're just set in this really terrible situation where we're propped up against each other. And so that's where a lot of my stories began to lean in. And I found myself really like absolutely fascinated with contained horror films and thrillers. I really thought I was going to move to LA to write contained thrillers. Like that was my jam. And then when I got here, I ended up writing a shit ton of comedy, which nobody would have ever expected. But again, I love horror and comedy for the same reasons, because they're commentary on society and they're constantly delivering the unexpected. And so I think the course honestly was like, it was fine. It wasn't overly complex. I think it's a fantastic program for someone who's in the military and doesn't have a ton of time, because you're able to be very flexible with your schedules. But the thing that I found that I was falling in love with was the craft of just learning how to hone a good story and create interesting characters, and then build a structure that would universally transcend like culture and time and place. And that to me was like, it was the kind of storytelling that we did back around the fires back in the day. It's the reason that all of our holy books were verbally shared for forever. It's like the most important things in our lives were kind of the subtext of this material, and the universal truths were meant to come out through this kind of mythic structure. And I fell in love with Joseph Campbell, started reading a bunch of his works, and then that kind of led me to deciding, basically, I got to get out of here and go do this for reals, because I think I can actually tell stories and see them on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, your life right now is certainly following that kind of the Joseph Campbell hero journey pattern.
Yeah.
Do you think everybody's life will go through a hero's journey, or do you think that it's more of everyone has the opportunity to do that? But because, there's...
Good question. Fuck. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's all right, bro. Because I kind of look at it, so just to give people a heads up, like anyone will understand this if you watch movies, if you read books or whatever. You have this arc, right? And, so we've got this. Your life is a perfect example of this. So the old world, TV is banned, the new world, you're working in TV, mirror images of each other, really nice, tidy character arc. Now, not everyone's maybe arc is as clean as that. And that's why selling your movie rights to your life will probably be quite straightforward. But
oh yeah, dude.
but
I can't wait.
but like there are people who through I think that, you know, some people have it easier to change than others. I'm not saying I have to caveat everything with these days now when people say, oh, it's not that easy. I'm not saying it's easy. That's the whole point of the hero's journey, is that overcoming challenges. But you know, some people, do they really change from 20-year-old them to 80-year-old them? So yeah, so what are your thoughts on that, mate? Because I saw your face lit up on this. I know we're getting into geek stuff now, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
So we are, mate. We're geeks. Let's just live it up.
Yeah, the nerd in me loves this. So yeah. What I love about the hero's journey is I think that we all kind of experience the baseline premise, which is coming to understand who we are as a person. So this is the first 10 minutes of the movie where you're just establishing who the fuck this person is. And then at some point, there's this call to action. Neo in the Matrix, you know, will you follow the White Rabbit? Daril, will you actually go watch movies? And then I think sometimes we say no. Sometimes we don't follow the White Rabbit. Sometimes we say in our world. And I think what I like to believe is that there are multiple calls to action in your life. And there are some people who will make the choice to say no every time. They are too afraid to leave the known, to change their identity, to challenge their view of the world. And those people very much have a fixed mindset. And you will know those people when you talk to them almost immediately, because they don't change their mind. You present a mountain of information that shows why there may be more possibilities out there, and they just are happy with what they already think. What I love to believe is that most of us aren't born that way. Most of us are curious in nature. Most of us have this inquisitivity. That's not a word. Most of us are inquisitive. And this inquisitive nature makes us want to question. And I think the thing that is so sad about our society is right now we live in a world that champions you staying asleep, you never questioning, you just accepting the fucking status quo exactly as it is. That is the premise that is given to us. And so the call to action for me, again, it started out as this very simple thing of film and TV. And then I went on this great journey where I entered to the unknown. I had no idea what I was getting into in the military. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew there had been a call to action in my life to change, and I had to change. And so what I hope is that everyone listening, everyone in the world, always has the ability to make that decision. I'm one of those weird people who I'm not even sure if we actually have free will. I think it's very empowering for me to believe that I have free will. And so therefore I live and believe that I actually do. But I also recognize that there are things that can dampen that. Trauma blocks are a huge piece of that. The fear becomes paralyzing and overwhelming for us, and it keeps us from moving forward. There are people that I know who could be living such incredible, vibrant lives, but they're afraid to go to a therapist. You know, like the least scary fucking thing in the world. You're afraid to go talk to somebody. You know what I mean? You're afraid to be vulnerable. Like, come on, you know? These are dudes who have like kicked down doors and done crazy shit. But there's a fear in them that's limiting them and keeping them from getting the help that they need and living their best version of their lives. And so I think that we're all presented with this call to action. I want to believe that the majority of us accept that call. But I also recognize like that may not be the case. And what I have kind of hoped to do through my storytelling and my act in life is challenge people to challenge the status quo and to be willing to take that leap of faith and cross into the unknown, enter the upside down, because it's fucking crazy and you have no idea what's going to happen. But I promise you, it's going to be a better adventure than if you just live in this ordinary world and your soul rides.
So this isn't a fully formed thought, right? So bear with me as I try and get this one out. I too know many people, probably some listening, who have that same thing of could be fucking brave as anything on the battlefield, struggle with coming home. And this kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, the nature-nurture thing. we're very lucky in this day and age that we have people like yourselves, combat medics. We have pararescue jumpers. We have incredible medical teams. Couldn't ask for better.
Yeah.
No other warrior class in history has ever had that.
Yeah.
And I don't want this to sound really kind of depressing and stuff, but I sometimes when I ask myself, are warriors born or made? It kind of makes sense to me. Again, a critical kind of thinking thing to go, okay, well, if I was to build a species, what would I want in that species? And I'd probably want a certain amount of them to not only be willing to go and fight, because you can't just be willing to fight, you have to be willing to die.
Yeah.
And again, if we look at stories that have come down to us from the ages, they quite often involve the hero giving their life. And that is, let's be honest, we've probably all had this little daydream where we're fucking aliens or corpses or whatever are piling up around our feet as we fight a last stand so the ship can get away with everybody on, the spaceship can get off. And we're there, you know, I'm going full Warhammer 45 and I got my chainsaw in one hand. I got my bot. Yeah, I think we've all had that, right? And I almost wonder if that's kind of part of the thing, is that with this new era that we're in, where thankfully most of us come home, if there's almost that thing of like, if it's we're almost battling something inside us that's like, you know, I mean, societies have always treated the soldiers badly when they come home, even the societies that treat them well, like America. I mean, yeah, it's funny because you're talking about like how America does, and I'm listening to You've Got 3 Degrees, and I'm thinking I couldn't even get a fucking kettlebell course. But it's like, you know, and I'm wondering, is this almost a battle going on internally with us, where it's like, you know, because you get these stories from the Greeks and the Romans, and these guys, just not all of them, but a lot of them, you campaign, every summer for your life. You're campaigning. You know, we had fighting seasons when you go to Afghanistan or Iraq, but you might only catch 1 or 2 of them because you're doing deployments. But back in the day, if you were a warrior, you went and did warrior shit until you couldn't warrior anymore, and then you're probably not coming home and being an old warrior. Do you think there's something to this half-baked thought that's kind of coming out right now?
Yeah. No, actually, I think it's there's so much that resonates. One, I definitely lived the fantasy of being that warrior hero. You know, I think when I saw Hacksaw Ridge, I'm like, that's the idealized version of myself right there. You know, that motherfucker just willing to go back out there and drag the bodies back. Doesn't matter, putting my life at risk. But I think this idea, look, I think it was very difficult for me to let go of my identity as being a soldier. And I didn't have a lot of the experiences that my fellow soldiers had. Right. I didn't go over there and take lives. I was very fortunate that I didn't have to experience a lot of that crazy shit. And then yet there's part of me that ironically still yearns for that. There's part of me that feels very guilty for not having that experience. And I think that I consider myself still a warrior. But the reality is that I am not in a position where I'm going to have to ever, you know, lay down suppressive fire while my buddies get the fuck out, and I'm going to just take the last 20 rounds in the chest like a man, you know, the arrows to the heart. And I think that part of our struggle as humanity is we have a lot of competing narratives about ourselves. And so not to get super Jungian on you, but if you're a fan of, you know, Carl Jung, I really believe in this idea of a cacophony of voices of myself. And so I have a round table, a conference, if you will, of the different versions of me. And sometimes there's Sergeant Fannin at the front of that. He's the warrior, the non-commissioned officer, the guy who knows the regulations, fucking follows the rules to a T. And then there's also little Daril, who was a cult minister, who was terrified of being burned in hell for not being able to speak a language he had never spoken. And then there's Daril, the artist, who wants to help people grow beyond their current limitations, right? And I think in that cacophony of voices at the table, what happens is sometimes the table gets hijacked. And one of those motherfuckers is really goddamn loud. And what I find for myself, and I don't know about you, but for myself, when one of those people is louder than the rest, then I end up becoming like imbalanced or frustrated or angry. That's a lot of times the warrior that wants revenge for injustices. Those parts of me become so loud that it quiets down the other parts of myself. And I think that as military veterans, one of the most important things that we can do is learn that our identity is not just wrapped up in that previous experience, but there is the future. And if we spend our entire lives fixated on that thing that's in the rearview mirror, if we spend our entire lives fixated on these traumatic moments in our lives, what we're going to find is that the ability to explore and discover something new and enter the unknown becomes greatly limited. And I don't know, again, I think it's very interesting, the difference between the UK and the US. And I'm super pissed off about, people like Marsha Blackburn voting against the PACT Act, and, these people who claim to support vets and then they vote against our interests. But I also very clearly recognize that my experience compared to my grandfather's who served in Vietnam, dude, fucking easy street. You know what I mean? Like, people spit on him, called him baby killer, like, all kinds of terrible shit. And so, I don't know. I think I didn't directly answer your question.
No, I think you did. I think you did, bro. I think as well, because I love that example of the different people around the table. And I think maybe what is kind of important is for us to keep going and to find happiness in these things. We have to keep inviting people to that table, aka new versions of ourselves. And we have to be, okay, well, if this isn't working for me now with Sergeant Fannin sitting at the table and Cult Minister Fannin sitting at the table, we need to invent a new Fannin, which might be teaches kids sports on a Wednesday night Fannin. He needs to get it back, but I think that's the only way, is you have to just keep and doing that. And I think that's kind of the thing, is it's not about abandoning who you were,
right?
Or, it's either, you can look at it as a, and it's not even like building on top of, because that kind of implies that person is getting buried. It's like you said, it's just kind of, you just need to bring some more kind of like voices into the room and stuff. But I do find it fascinating to do this whole big thing, because I do think it is so linked to storytelling. Like, why do stories resonate with us? Why can we go and watch a movie in China and we might not understand what the fuck anyone's saying, but like, just through watching that film, it will make sense to us through people's expressions and actions, what the arc is and stuff. And the fact that resonates with everybody, I do find so fascinating. One
more thing that I would add to this is, I believe that we are all the screenwriters of our own lives, right? And I think that what happens is sometimes we just keep writing the same story over and over and over again, instead of creating a new act, a new chapter in this story of our lives. And I think that's the piece that I wish, and I hope for every person, not just vets, but especially vets, because we become so fixated on this one area, and it's foundational, dude. Chapter 2 is fucking necessary, but if that's where the story ends, then it's going to feel unfulfilling for everyone, including ourselves. Nobody wants to read a book with the same fucking chapter over and over and over again. That's not to take away from the resilience, but it allows us to grow and shape ourselves in new ways. And what I found is that therapy for me has been the ability to uncover the previous chapters, the things that I missed. So it's almost like rereading a previous chapter and experiencing it from a different perspective, because now I get to appreciate little cult minister Daril in a completely different way than I did when I was actually embodying that experience. And not go on.
Yeah, that's a really cool way of putting it. Like, I've done therapy before, which I would define as kind of crisis therapy, as in like, I don't know what the fuck I do to be therapy. And I think there's a lot of things to be said for just, I'm actually in a really good place, but like, let's just, if you like, I'm not a car guy, so this analogy is going to fall flat on its face, but try to do some tuny stuff to the engine thingy, and you want to get that extra 1% out of it, so I don't know why I came up with the car thing. I'll stick to books.
The brain is the most important organ in our body, right? So I need to go see a doctor to make sure that I am optimized efficiently. Like, if I'm a CEO, I have dozens of people who I am now responsible for. I need to make sure that I'm operating at my best. And that's as a soldier, as a human, as a leader. And so for me, making sure that I'm going to get a checkup to make sure that everything's running as well as it can be is just kind of a no-brainer. Like it's very interesting to me. Obviously, I feel like I'm very fortunate in that I can afford therapy. I know that's a big piece of it. But if you are able to, I think it's so important to go just make sure that you're doing everything that you can, because how are you going to be the best leader that you can be? How are you going to be the best writer that you can be? How are you going to be the best father, mother, brother, sister, whatever, if you don't know that you're handling your shit and your brain is functioning appropriately? And for great athletes, I mean, like they have coaches, they have all kinds of people that help them psychologically hit that next level. And I think that's something that we can destigmatize amongst our brothers and sisters in uniform, because you need to make sure that you're operating effectively for yourself and for those around you.
Totally agree. And because we have a lot of infantry listening while you guys are at the hospital, get your junk checked as well. You're probably overdue a check on your junk. So get them both in at the same time. Take care of both.
Balls and brains. We know what's important.
Yeah. All right, mate. So let's talk about what you're up to now. So, like you said, you're living in LA. Actually, what was the when you were growing up and you were given this outside view of the world? Did LA hold a special? Was LA like the burniest part of the great hell kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely thought that's where all the liberal commies lived, But other than that, I had no real perception, and I had heard of it as like this city of iniquity, right? So my expectations were like hookers on every street corner kind of thing. And then obviously when I showed up and I saw the beautiful sunshine with the perfect weather year round and the palm trees and the beaches, I was like, I don't know. This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But I was weird as shit because I went straight from, the cult to the army to here. So I did not assimilate into the culture super easily. I did not know who celebrities were, which is like culturally relevant material. Like everybody in LA is always talking about this like C-level celebrity that you've never heard of. And so I got out People magazine, dude. I started making flashcards like back to homeschool where I'm like trying to memorize. So like Jennifer Aniston, got it. Adam Sandler, got it. I
had to memorize from 15 pretty well, mate.
Yeah, look, you have better memory than me, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And then it was so weird going back to school because I was the old guy. I was like, I felt like I spent a decade in the army, and now I'm showing up on campus with these kids who didn't even remember 9/11, and I'm going like, oh fuck, like different culture, different world, different era. And I'm really grateful. There was this amazing dude, Sean Vance, Green Beret, went to UCB in Groundlings, and I bumped into him on a set. So I started basically just trying to work in production as much as I could. And I did a little bit of everything for free. I interned with this company called Musa Consulting. At the time, they were doing a HBO show with Jack Black that had some military elements. They were doing Michael Bay's Transformers stuff. They were doing some big shows. And so I interned there, and I got stuck on all the rinky-dink non-Hollywood productions. And I cut my teeth. I learned how to use a camera. I learned how to edit. I learned all of these different skill sets. And then on one of those sets, I met this Green Beret, Sean, who was a hilarious dude, went to UCB and Groundlings. And I was like, look, dude, you teach me to be funny. Or I'll teach you how to write. You help me be normal. And so we teamed up, and dude, it was the best thing ever. I spent the next almost decade writing with this guy who would become my best friend. We moved in Beverly Hills. We were in these unrenovated apartments just south of Wilshire. So like, this is like the financial district of Beverly Hills, one block over from Rodeo. So like the fanciest fucking stores and people. And then, it was like a Rolls Royce and this beautiful Beamer, and then my Toyota Corolla. You know what I mean? Like just sticking out. But we were best friends. We started writing together, and he and I really bonded. He ended up getting a job at this celebrity gym. And so we came in and, always trying to add value. We got to do this movie Death Wish. So I I don't know if you've seen this movie, but Bruce Willis, somebody murders his family. He gets a gun, watches some YouTube videos online, and goes and just starts murking people. And so Sean and I got to train the actors on how to shoot, move, and communicate like they knew what they were doing. Sean and I shot all the videos that Bruce Willis would end up using in the movie. So I got to shoot a bunch of footage that got into the film. And we just kind of found our way as these military guys in Hollywood. And Matt Damon eventually found out. And Matt was like, yo, one of my chopped liver, you're out here selling shows and you've never even mentioned it to me. And so we ended up creating a show with Matt that we sold to Netflix, and that kind of launched our careers. And I was in the middle of film school too, so the luckiest dude in the world. Like everybody, like,
dude, they must have hated you in that class.
Dude, honestly, they were so supportive and lovely. I got to say, like, some real homies there. But I think anyone that was in the periphery was just like, "What, this motherfucker?" You know, like this weird guy is the one that does it. You know.
Well, dude, I mean, I think from your experiences and mine to a lesser extent, it seems to be if you want to get involved in film, move to LA or go out to LA, meet a Green Beret, and start writing with them, because that's pretty much what I did with Nate. So
okay, speaking of which, can you tell the listeners about how we have a history together and didn't even realize it? That's fucking crazy.
Well, dude, at this point, I'm assuming, like, having done the podcast for a while and stuff, there is no stranger when it comes to the military network, and that is that includes transatlantic. Like at this point, like I'm always it's everyone knows everyone. But yeah, so Daril, like, turned out so I did a film a few years ago. You guys will hear me plugging it at the time about MVP that I wrote with Nate Boyer, and one of the things I always do is, you know, if I got a guest coming on the podcast, go and see who we know each other. And then, you know, you do, I wouldn't say call it the good dude test, because you already chatted at that point, but just more like, hey, I've got your friend coming on. He's like, yeah, dude, he was in like MVP. I was like, what? But in my defense, he was wearing a pair of glasses. So
yeah,
was I supposed to?
And shaved my beard, which I look like, you know, 20 years younger without this thing. I immediately become that 17-year-old kid again.
I mean, as soon as he said it, I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense." But at the time, I was like, "Oh, dude." But yeah, but I do, and you know, I do really believe, because when you think about it, bro, the British Army is, I mean, and when I say British Army as well, like, when I'm talking like the infantry and stuff, it's like 40,000 people at a time, right? It's just not quite as small as the town you grew up in, but pretty fucking small. And obviously, there's turnover in that, but even so, like, it's someone usually knows someone. And then I think now with kind of the industries that you and I work in, I had a chat. I had a chat on the phone the other day to Ethan Nagel. Don't know if you know Ethan. He's also in film. We were having a chat, and we were like, oh yeah, I know. So, yeah, bunch of mutual friends, and you know, I just feel like at this point, you know, we're you know, kind of like 15 years removed from maybe like the tail end of like a lot of the kind of like the worry kind of bits. And so by now people have had time to kind of go through this transition and start to get established and stuff. And it's great, dude. Like I feel I'll come across every now and again, oh, there's nothing more toxic than the veteran community. I couldn't disagree more. Not disagree more.
No. I think that there are individuals who are loud. Maybe there may be a loud minority there, but almost everyone that I know, and there's some really great groups, like being a part of VME as a great example, Veterans in Media and Entertainment. That's where I met Sean, my writing partner. Like, you will find that it's exactly like the rest of humanity. There's a slice of us that suck, and that's undeniable. There's a slice of us that are shitty, but that's not all of us, and it's not the majority of us. They just happen to be like loud and get a lot of attention. But I think the overwhelming majority of the veteran community has been, dude, wildly fucking supportive, and wildly, like, even to the point of my biggest champions, I think, in LA have been other vets. And there's a community there. You know what I mean? It's real.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And yeah, when it comes to that, though, kind of going back to like the reinvention or the next chapter or whatever you want to call it, it's a lot easier to do that when you know that when you other people who are inventing, because I mean, you and I have both chosen the similar kind of space that we're moving into. A lot of people listening aren't going to want to be film producers or authors or whatever. But I guarantee you, wherever field you are trying to move into, might be, I don't know, in music, it might be a state agency, or whatever it is. There will be other veterans moving into that. And it's great because you can kind of do that transition together. And you know, if you're finding it difficult because, or you've got challenges because it's like, you know, I'm sure you and I have similar things. You know, not just like there are challenges going into a new industry with the way that things were done in the military, and because you have to adapt. And that's the other big thing as well. It is 100% on you to adapt, not for that industry to adapt to fit you. What are some of the kind of the things that on that kind of note, let's call it top tips that you can give to someone who is seeking to do that kind of that next step in their transition?
I think that's a great setup, dude. The first thing I would say is the willingness to adapt is absolutely crucial. You know, we talk all the time in the military about like improvise, adapt, and overcome. It's like the necessary thing in the military. It's so fucking essential in the civilian world as well. I think get over the idea that there's going to be accountability across the board. Get over the idea that you're going to rely on someone else, and you have to really own your lane and know your value. I think this is a terrible title of a book, so don't judge the book by its title, but The Go-Giver is an incredible book if you want to just think about how to infiltrate a new industry, a new world. It's all about the idea. There are 5 laws, and a big piece of this is learning to give and start with a give and adding value. But a 10 out of 10 recommend The Go-Giver. And then I think if you're trying to get into the creative space, or I think this is kind of true of other things. It's true of even starting a business as well. So I'm very entrepreneurial. About 3 years ago, I started this company, KINO, that uses technology to help create film and TV and make it more efficient and equitable, because I was just really frustrated with the old system. But the piece of advice that Matt Damon gave me actually applies to this company. And he gave it to me about writing. So we had sent him a bunch of scripts, Sean and I, and one of them was called Glutes. It was about a Hollywood gym known for turning asses into stars. He thought that was fucking hilarious. He was like, you guys are so funny. But he was like, you know, you really need to come up with something that's authentically you, because they're going to take this idea. There's 1,000 other people, and they're going to give that to a showrunner who's already been in a Hollywood gym. You need to come up with something that is authentically you. And remember, guys, it's not about how good the idea is. It's about how good the execution is. And I think that is so true in life. The reason why I was able to raise millions of dollars for this company that I had started is because I had a story that emphasized why I was crucial into being in this role. For the TV show that we ended up selling, it was called The Green Beret's Guide to Surviving the Apocalypse. Half-hour action comedy about the end of the world. The world ends in a different way in every episode. So it's like an anthology series. And it's like a nuclear attack, a super volcano, a pandemic. And the key was that the lead broke the fourth wall and told you how to actually survive. So you're surviving the initial blast. You're going down to CVS in the United States or some drugstore. I don't know what the UK equivalent is. Shoppers in Canada. What's a good drugstore in the UK?
Well, I can't give his number out on thing. Oh, wait, drugstore. Sorry.
Yeah, dude, what's the hookup?
No, I don't know. Well, we have the National Health Service here.
Perfect. You go down to the National Health Services. You're going to get activated charcoal. You're going to find trash bags and duct tape. You can build a hazmat suit. The idea was that you would go to a spot and you would learn how to survive all of these crazy end of the world scenarios. It was perfectly aligned to who we were. They couldn't do the show without us because nobody had this kind of survival information. And we were able to make this really fun action comedy. When we sold our show to ABC with Jimmy Kimmel, it was based on Sean's real life. His family had adopted a kid from Russia. So we found how to take these ideas and make them personal. And then when it came to KINO, I told the story about how I watched my friends create a franchise. One of these dudes made a franchise that brought in over $1 billion in revenue, and he only made a couple $100,000. Like, you want to talk about a broken fucking system? And so by telling this, and this is all storytelling, by the way, the key to success in life is being a great storyteller, because once you can show people the world that you want to see, the impact that you want to have, whether that's through music or film or business or insurance, because you want to protect them. Like once you can find that purpose and that story that resonates within you, you will be infinitely more successful. And I think a lot of times we don't spend enough time thinking about the story of our own lives and what our purpose is and what our grand mission is. And I think for me, whenever I've been fully aligned with my purpose and mission, I have been successful.
Love it, bro. And on that note, do we tell people the news?
News. What a great segue. Okay. The reason why I started this podcast off grinning from ear to ear is because we just found out that KINO's first film, The Undertone, which, by the way, on paper, by Hollywood standards, does not make sense. It is a single location horror. It is one person on screen. It's about a podcast, so it's very much an audible experience, an auditory experience. And it's like a first-time director. The actor, absolutely incredible, but she doesn't really have a name. We invested in this film, and we shot it at the beginning of the year. And in the shortest cycle time ever, we turned over a cut for Fantasia in about 6 months. So I know you know how quick that is. And we just got acquired by A24 for a 7-figure MG, so a minimum guarantee of at least 7 figures with a 1,000-screen theatrical release, which is one of the largest guaranteed releases for this tiny little movie. And I am so fucking stoked. A24, for those of you who aren't familiar, is like the biggest independent studio that you want to work with. They swept the big six at the Oscars, so the only independent studio to ever win Best Director, Best Writer, all those, the big six categories. And I'm so proud of this team, dude. This is like, to borrow the sports analogy, this is the equivalent of your first time at bat, and you happen to be at the World Series. You happen to hit the game-winning grand slam. It's just the most incredible thing ever. I've been like losing my mind. Very proud of the team.
Well done, mate. And I just want to explain to people as well. So that means it's going to be on 1,000 different cinemas at the same time.
Yes, 1,000 different cinemas across North America only. So there's going to be a much larger release. And what's really cool is this movie, this is like, this is a sub-$1 million movie. This is a small movie. But this is, if we go and do a great job, if you guys all go and listen and watch this movie, please. But if you do this, we're going to be able to set a chart for a different type of filmmaking. And we're going to show the world that you can actually still make independent cinema profitable. And I hear your producer over here is agreeing with me. They're saying,
sorry, mate. I wasn't sure if I was going to pick it up. No, it's all right. It's all right. I'm proud of you too, Lolo. You don't have to go jump in. Yeah, mate. So, what that sounds like it's great news for you, but also great news for cinema.
Oh,
right.
Huge.
That
well,
this
right now,
kind of things are happening.
Yeah. So if I can, just a quick bit of context right now, in the last 3 years, our industry has plummeted. I mean, it's been more than 3 years, but the last 3 have been particularly difficult. So for independent filmmakers, a lot of times, this is very much MVP. You're begging, borrowing, and stealing enough money to get this thing across the finish line. And then you have to figure out how you're going to distribute it in the world. And in the old world, people will watch it. They go, hey, you know what? This is a great fucking movie. Let me give you a few $1 million because you made this thing for, $1 million. I'm going to double your money. And then we're going to take it out and we're going to put it in theaters. And we're going to sell the territories internationally. So the UK and France and Germany and Southeast Asia and all these different territories. And then you'll end up making a good, decent chunk of revenue back. Your investors are happy. Basically, there's this minimum guarantee in which they are certain that they will make their money back. So I'm certain that your little movie will make at least $1 million. So I'm going to give you $1 million up front, and then we'll split the revenue on what comes in over the top of that. And so what ended up happening over the last few years is that movies that used to get 7 figures, very low 7 figures, let's say $1 million MG, that MG dropped to about $500,000, and then it dropped to about $100,000. And now in the last year, when we were at Cannes, which is like the big film festival, and there's a market and all that. But they were offering like 5-figure MG. So movies that used to be in huge amount of profit, now they're making back 10% of their budget. And then they're just having to hope that all the ticket sales and everything goes the way that it should. And so what this is for independent cinema is a huge mark, because that means that we're going back to kind of the old model. This is an opportunity to show that you can make a movie for a scrappy amount of money. You can have great creative if you really believe in the story, and you have great actors and directors and talent and producers behind it, that you can actually turn this into a profit. And it's a huge stamp. This has been a really good year for the box office. We've had some big swings and some wins here. Weapons, dude, just did really great, like a $42 million opening weekend. Like, there's some really great films that are coming out that are starting to get traction again. And I'm hoping this is a shot in the arm for cinema.
Hell yeah. Well, congratulations again, brother. And like, again, it's, as somebody who's with a vested interest in this as well. I'm like, and this is good, great news to everybody.
Yeah.
Let's just explain to people then, because we kind of thrown some numbers around and some things about like, it's going to be in 1,000 cinemas. Great. There's a lot of road to get there. What does that road look like in terms of, like, you don't have to go into super detail, but just kind of give someone like a rough idea of how it works from going to, like, right now you've kind of got the deal. Now, how does it work with the filming and editing and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great. So the way that it works is, we shot this thing in January. We had an incredible team, and Ian, this dude is a freaking genius. So like, he's brilliant. We shot this thing in his mom's house, like, if that tells you the scale of the film, and in Ontario, in Canada. And then we spent a few months just trying to rush through a cut, because we knew we had to get it ready for this film festival, Fantasia. So we got to cut out. And this film really came together in the sound booth. When you watch this movie, you have to watch it in theaters or with headphones on or surround sound, because the auditory experience is next level. But then we had a one premiere at Fantasia Film Festival. And this is where we sold out the theater, and we were so lucky. There were 6 buyers that ended up coming in and putting in bids. And so that created this bidding war, one of them being A24. So A24 made the deal. We all cheers, hoorah, this is amazing. Now the hard part begins. So we have to begin planning out our rollout strategy. We'll probably do a Q1 release is my guess. So at the beginning of next year, it'll actually be in theaters. And between now and then, we're cutting out promos. We're getting all the cast and crew ready to go and start marketing the film. And then at the same time, the team at A24 is now sending out secure screener links. And what's really cool, dude, is they're using our tech to do it. So they're using the technology that I built. My brother built TSA PreCheck, all the biometric enrollment software. So he built a secure streaming platform. And that's what we do. It's kind of the boring side of the business when we're not making movies. Honestly, it's 95% of what we do is bring, secure streaming stuff. But it's cool because for independent filmmakers, that used to cost thousands of dollars just to be able to send out links. And now we've even created a free tier. So if you have a movie and you need to send out secure links, you can do it for free through ScreenKey. And I'm really proud of the team and what we built there. But the idea is that now A24 is sending out links to people like Netflix and cinemas and all these different individuals, and they're going to figure out what the global market is. And the way that it works really quickly is there are windows in film. So the first window is theatrical. That's the big ticket price. Everybody goes and sees it for, let's call it $14 to $20, depending on where you're at in the world and whatever, but you're paying that premium for a cinema ticket. After that, they have this thing called a PVOD window, which is like basically where you rent for $30 while it's still in theaters, but you can watch it from home. After that, they have a window called TVOD. That's that transactional. So it's a rental, $3.99 rental. And then SVOD, that's like Netflix, where there's no rental, it's just on a platform. And then finally, TVOD, or not TVOD, AVOD, which is just advertising. So that's literally a fraction of a penny per view. That's the long tail. And so each of these windows, the dollar amount kind of shrinks in every window a little bit. You get paid a little less, but that's the long tail of the film. And so if we go into theaters and we do really well in this first 1,000 theaters, then they're going to double down and they may expand our theatrical, and then maybe we get more seats. And that's where things get really exciting, because then you can actually grow off the top. And the bigger your theatrical is, the more they're going to pay in the PVOD window and those downstream windows. So that's why theatrical is so important, and people needing to go see it in that opening weekend, because they use that as kind of the litmus test to see how it's going to do globally over time.
And if you're listening to this and don't go and see it, then you hate veterans. So
I'm going to just play this clip over and over again. That's fine.
Get your tickets. Mate, that's fantastic. Okay, let's take this now then back to the kind of emotional kind of side of things.
Yeah.
How does it feel for you now? Not just now, you as somebody who has produced content, and I don't know if probably the right word for content, the right word for thing, media, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Knowing that, like, you were that guy who had his mind expanded by film. Because like, let's be honest, I'll just go on a little tangent. This day and age, people, and a lot of what people see is kind of brain rot, and it gets screens have a bit of a bad press at the moment, don't they? For understandable reasons. There is a lot of brain rot out there and stuff. But how does it feel knowing that might be your work changing someone's way of thinking?
Yeah, dude, I feel, honestly, it doesn't feel real. You know, when you talk about the hero's journey, you know, there's this, that you grab the elixir at the very end in that third act, and then you win. You grab the elixir and you run. I feel like it's the most euphoric thing, but it doesn't feel real. I can't process, honestly. I'm sure that at some point I'm going to be sitting in the theater crying my eyes out like a big baby, going like, oh man, because the flood of emotion from that little kid who was told that this is evil and a sin and terrible and it's going to destroy your life. That kid getting to see, you know, we did an event at the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, which is one of the most beautiful theaters in the world, when we started our company. And I just remember standing up there and looking out at these like hundreds of seats going like packed, dude, like fucking like hundreds of people. And I just remember going like, this is the most incredible experience of my life. And I feel like this is going to top it, because it's really hard to do what we have been able to do. And I feel like I'm the luckiest dude in the world, because I know so many people who are out there, and I want this to be a win for everyone. And so for me, dude, seeing our movie, our logo on screen, knowing that we had a little bit of an impact in the way that this film was brought forward, man, that means the absolute fucking world to me. And I cannot wait, because it is the first step in a very long journey. And I'm excited because I don't know what that next chapter is. And I can't wait to fucking write it, because it's gonna be nuts.
All right, guys, there you have it. Daril, thanks so much for coming on, mate. Really enjoyed it. And hopefully see you in Los Angeles sometime in the near future. And listeners, hopefully see you in somewhere in the near future too. But if not, then I'll see you in the next episode, which will be coming along in about 10 days' time. We have another War Story episode coming along. We've got a few recorded and in the bank, ready to roll. So, we'll be getting one out in about 10 days, and then another one about 10 days after that. Just want to say a big thank you, as always, to all of you who share the podcast, leave reviews, leave ratings, all that kind of stuff. We can't grow without it. People do actually read the reviews sometimes before they listen to a podcast. So if you say something nice, you might get us a listener, which we'd appreciate. And if you could use the share buttons and all that stuff that's in the technology thing that you're using, that would help too. Or if you could use the Mark 1 mouth hole, that would also work for telling people about the podcast. So however you want to spread the word, we'd appreciate it. Sandwich boards, whatever. And if you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, either Veteran State of Mind, talking about after service, or War Story podcast, talking about your operational service, please get in touch. All the ways of getting in touch, the link down in the show notes. Give us a shout on social media, anything like that. Please go show Daril some love. Give him a follow. Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I'll catch you again very soon.